We from Debo Stales are truly overwhelmed by the love and support from each of you watching today. You're not just viewers, you're the heart of this channel, and every like, share, and subscribe lights up this journey. From all corners of America and the rest of the world, your kindness and belief inspires us to keep telling these stories. You too can still make your impact count. It's never too late to take that great step. Please join our family by subscribing and sharing. We're stronger together, and I'm so grateful to have you here. Now, let's start with today's powerful story. When Fear Meets Hope, the unlikely romance born from horror. Grace Patterson's fingers trembled around the antique locket as she froze in the cold hallway of the abandoned Beaumont house. Every breath left her fogging in the frigid air. Vincent Calloway's hand gripped hers tightly, his dusty work clothes brushing against the cracked wooden floor as he tried to keep her steady. A woman in white appeared before them, floating, her face wet with silent tears. Grace's heart pounded. The locket in her hand might be the only thing that could release the spirit trapped for 160 years, but reaching toward her meant stepping past a line between life and death that could never be crossed. They had met only 6 hours ago outside the gates of this cursed estate, two strangers brought together by a shared curiosity and now thrown into a danger neither could have expected. Grace's eyes met Vincent's, the unspoken question heavy in the air. Every second stretched. Every choice weighed. What would you do if helping a tortured soul meant risking everything you held dear? Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, subscribe for more stories like this, and don't miss tomorrow's story. It's one you'll want to see. Thank you for supporting these powerful stories. Now come with us to the very beginning. Grace Patterson stepped off the streetcar in New Orleans' Garden District, the humid air carrying the scent of magnolias and damp brick. She tightened her jacket around her shoulders and scanned the houses along Prytania Street until her gaze landed on the Beaumont house at number 1847. Its Greek Revival columns were weathered and cracked, the paint peeling in wide strips, and Spanish moss draped from ancient oak trees, swaying slightly in the breeze. The gardens were overgrown, weeds climbing toward the second-floor windows. Every element of decay seemed to hold a secret, and Grace felt the weight of her grandmother Delphine's words urging her to set right something long forgotten. In her hand, she clutched a leather-bound journal, pages worn from years of careful reading, each entry revealing glimpses of a life devoted to mercy and healing. Across the street, Vincent Calloway leaned against a wrought-iron fence, pretending to examine the intricate gates, though he had been watching Grace since she emerged from the streetcar. He was a restoration architect, but he had resisted taking this assignment for weeks, knowing the house's reputation and feeling the weight of the story surrounding it. Something about the way Grace hesitated on the cracked sidewalk compelled him forward. Perhaps it was the look of determination mingled with hesitation, or the subtle tension in her posture. He stepped toward her, his voice calm but certain. "You shouldn't face this alone. I can walk you inside." Grace glanced up, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, and for a moment the world narrowed to the space between them. A fleeting sense of safety appeared in his presence, though she barely knew him. She nodded, unable to explain why she trusted a stranger in the shadow of this vast, crumbling house. They walked together toward the wide double doors, the wood swollen from decades of neglect. The air felt heavier with each step. Vincent glanced at her journal. "Your grandmother's work brought you here." Grace nodded. She always said this house held a sorrow that needed to be understood, that someone had to make things right. She looked down at the journal, the pages folded at cryptic entries, mentions of a woman named Adelaide, a sorrow that would not leave, and moments of quiet intervention. Vincent studied her expression, noting the mix of resolve and vulnerability. He offered a small smile, almost shy. "Maybe we can be brave together." The words landed with unexpected comfort. Grace allowed herself a brief smile, and in that instant, a silent agreement passed between them. Fear might have brought them to the house, but courage, or the desire for it, would make them enter. They paused at the threshold, the doors heavy under their hands. The air smelled of dust and old wood. Vincent pushed one door open, and they stepped inside together. The house greeted them with the weight of history, each creak of the floorboards echoing through high ceilings. Light filtered in from broken shutters, revealing faded wallpaper, a chandelier hanging askew, and the remnants of a lifelong paused. Walking side by side, they exchanged fragments of conversation. Grace spoke of her grandmother's time as a nurse in the 1960s, visiting Clarence Beaumont in his final days. Vincent shared the quiet reverence his own grandmother had for the Creole beliefs surrounding restless spirits and the responsibility to help them. Neither mentioned the losses they carried, the personal grief that shaped them, but in their shared words, hints emerged. A breeze drifted through the hall, lifting dust motes into the air. Grace shivered and Vincent instinctively reached for her hand, a gesture of both support and connection. Her fingers tightened around his. A bond, fragile and immediate, had begun. As they moved further into the house, the sunlight faded behind the shutters, leaving rooms half-lit and silent. Shadows clung to corners, but they were not threatening. They were reminders of the time and lives that had passed, waiting for acknowledgement. The first act of courage was simple, yet profound. They chose to face the house together. Each step forward was not just toward understanding the house's secrets, but toward forming a bridge between two people who had carried fear and loss in silence. Words were few, but the act itself spoke volumes. Vincent glanced at Grace and whispered, "Whatever is in here, we'll face it side by side." She nodded, gripping her journal as though it were both a shield and a key. They paused for a moment at the bottom of the grand staircase, feeling the weight of anticipation. The doors ahead led them into a story centuries old, a tragedy waiting to be remembered, and perhaps, to be healed. Without another word, they ascended the stairs together. Each step was deliberate, a silent agreement of trust, courage, and shared purpose. Neither could foresee what awaited them beyond the next hallway, nor the bond that would deepen as the secrets of the Beaumont house began to unfold. They stepped fully into the Beaumont house, the grand doors closing behind them with a low thud that echoed through the empty halls. Dust hung in the air, stirred by their careful movements, revealing layers of decay across the walls and floors. Broken furniture lay scattered as if abandoned in haste, a chair tipped over near the fireplace, a cracked porcelain vase still resting on a mantel, books strewn along the floor, their pages curling from age and humidity. The grand staircase rose before them, its balusters chipped and banisters dulled with years of neglect, yet it still held a dignity that spoke of the house's long history. Grace ran her hand along the warped railing, eyes lingering on faded wallpaper patterned with flowers and vines. "My grandmother, Delphine," she began softly. She was a nurse in the 1960s. She visited Clarence Beaumont in his final days. She always said the house carried more than memories, it carried sorrow that needed to be understood. She opened her leather-bound journal and flipped through pages filled with neat, careful handwriting. She wrote about terrible sorrow, about a woman named Adelaide, about cries heard in the night. Vincent followed her gaze, noting the mixture of reverence and determination in her voice. "My grandmother believed the same," he admitted, voice low. "In our Creole traditions, some spirits can't move on because of grief or loss. They need help, sometimes from the living. She always said compassion was the only bridge." They climbed the staircase slowly, the wood creaking beneath their feet. On the second floor, Grace paused before a doorway, pulling a faded portrait from a dusty shelf. The painting depicted a young woman in a white gown, a single camellia pinned to her chest. Her eyes held both innocence and quiet despair. Grace traced a finger along the frame. "Adelaide Beaumont," she murmured. "My grandmother wrote about her. She said Adelaide's love was forbidden, and that she suffered in silence." Vincent knelt beside her, tapping on his phone. According to the records, Adelaide Beaumont was born in 1841 and died in 1863. She was in love with Gabriel Laurent. Their relationship, it was dangerous. Interracial love in New Orleans during the 1860s could destroy families, reputations, even lives. Her father would never have approved. He shook his head slowly. No wonder she's trapped here. A sudden chill swept through the corridor, brushing against Grace's skin. She shivered, instinctively reaching for Vincent's hand. From above came the faint sound of crying, soft and mournful, like a candle flickering in the wind. Her breath caught. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Vincent nodded, his hand tightening around hers. "Yes. It's her. Adelaide." He swallowed, then spoke in a steadier voice. "She wants to be remembered. Maybe she wants someone to help her find peace." The house seemed to respond. The temperature dropped further, their breath visible in the cold, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed above. Vincent's phone buzzed with research updates, but he barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, memories rising unbidden. "I lost my wife 5 years ago," he admitted quietly. "I shut down after that. Avoided people, work, everything that reminded me of life. Until today. Being here, with you, it's the first time I've felt alive in years." Grace looked at him, her eyes softening. She could feel the weight of his loss, and it resonated with her own loneliness. "I understand," she said gently. "We can carry some of the burden together, at least for a while." Her words, simple and unassuming, allowed a fragile trust to grow between them. In that moment, their fear of the house and the sorrow it held seemed smaller. They continued through the hall, the wooden floors groaning beneath their careful steps. In a shadowed corner, they discovered another portrait, smaller and more intimate. Adelaide alone, gazing into the distance with a camellia in her hair. Vincent's eyes widened. "She's beautiful. And she looks so sad. Every detail matters. Her life, her love, everything that was denied to her." Grace flipped open the journal again. Delphine wrote about Adelaide sneaking out to meet Gabriel in City Park, under the oaks that are still standing today. They were brave, but her father, he kept her locked in her room that night. Her voice trembled. "The cries. I think they were from her." Vincent nodded, processing the horror of a young love suffocated by fear and prejudice. He felt an ache not just for Adelaide, but for himself, for all the moments he had let slip by in mourning, untouched by the courage to feel again. "We have to help her," he said softly, "even if it's just to let her story be heard." As they ascended to the 3rd floor, the hall grew colder still. The faint sobs seemed closer, more urgent, almost guiding them forward. They paused before a door at the end of the corridor, its wood dark and polished compared to the surrounding decay. Without touching it, Grace felt the pressure of the unknown, the weight of centuries pressing against her chest. Vincent glanced at her. "It feels like it's waiting. For us," he murmured. His fingers brushed hers again, a silent reassurance. Grace nodded, gripping her journal like a talisman. "We've come this far. Whatever's beyond this door, we face it together." The door creaked open on its own, as if inviting them inside. Neither pulled away. Instead, they stepped forward, guided by a mixture of courage, curiosity, and the fragile hope that in understanding Adelaide's tragedy, they might also discover something profound about themselves. Above them, the faint cries faded into a low, sorrowful hum, settling in the corners of the hallway and in their hearts. The journey into the Beaumont house's secrets was only beginning, and neither Grace nor Vincent could have imagined how much the past would mirror their own struggles, or how their connection would deepen as the house revealed its stories of love, loss, and the longing for closure. Their steps on the 3rd floor landing were slow, deliberate. Grace's hand remained intertwined with Vincent's, their fingers gripping each other as if holding courage itself. The hallway stretched ahead, narrow and dim, the wooden floors creaking under every careful step. The air carried a weight that seemed older than the house, a quiet heaviness born of grief and longing. At the end of the hall, a single door stood, polished and solid, untouched by the years of decay around it. Grace drew a small skeleton key from the pocket of her jacket, worn from decades of careful keeping. She ran her fingers along its cold metal surface. "My grandmother kept this for years," she said softly. "She always said it might open the door to what must finally be set right." Vincent leaned closer, examining the lock. "It's original," he said, his voice low. "Most doors this old would have had their locks replaced decades ago. Whoever locked this room intended it to remain sealed. That key, it isn't just a tool. It's a bridge across time." Grace nodded, taking a deep breath. She inserted the key and turned it with care. The lock clicked open, a sound that seemed louder than it should in the stillness. The door swung inward, revealing a room unlike any they had seen in the house. It was preserved as though frozen in time. Dust clung to the edges of the floor, but the furniture remained untouched. A narrow bed with a faded quilt sat against the wall, a small writing desk tucked neatly in the corner. Dried camellias were scattered across the floor and desk, their fragrance faint but unmistakable. Every detail seemed to whisper the life of the young woman who had lived, and died, here. Grace approached the desk and lifted a bundle of letters tied together with a faded ribbon. She handed one to Vincent, and they began to read. The words were passionate but pure, filled with devotion and longing. Adelaide wrote of secret meetings in City Park beneath the ancient oaks that still stood today. She spoke of stolen glances, whispered promises, and the fear of being discovered by those who would forbid her love. Vincent unfolded the last letter, dated March 15, 1863. The handwriting was hurried, anxious, yet tender. Adelaide described a planned midnight meeting at St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. Her excitement mingled with fear. Grace's eyes widened as she whispered, "This is the night she never returned." Vincent found a folded sheet beneath the letters, brittle and yellowed. It was Adelaide's death certificate. The date matched the night of the planned meeting. The cause of death was sudden and mysterious. Beside it lay a newspaper clipping, the ink faded but legible. The article suggested that her father had discovered the escape plan and locked her in her room. She had died inside, while Gabriel waited in vain, unaware of the fate that had befallen her. Grace's hand shook slightly as she opened a small silver locket on the desk. Inside were two tiny portraits, Adelaide and Gabriel, their faces frozen in smiles and hope. An engraving along the edge read, "Love transcends all." The weight of the words pressed on Grace's heart. She and Vincent exchanged a look, the realization settling between them. Adelaide had died here, locked away while Gabriel waited, a love story left unfinished for decades. A sudden coldness swept through the room, more intense than before. The hairs on their arms rose, yet the feeling was not threatening. A gentle presence formed before them, a woman in white, translucent, her eyes deep with sorrow. She did not advance. She simply stood, heartbroken, her gaze fixed on the locket in Grace's hand. Vincent swallowed and spoke, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "Adelaide, we know what happened. We know you loved him, and that you didn't leave him. We want to help you reach him." The apparition blinked, the faintest lift of hope in her expression. Grace stepped closer, holding the locket outward. "He waited for you, all his life. We can make sure he knows you didn't abandon him." The room seemed to hold its breath. The dried camellias appeared to lean toward them, the air humming with the energy of a story finally acknowledged. Adelaide's ghost remained, heartbroken but no longer resentful. The pain of being forgotten hung in the air, but it softened as if their words and presence were stitching a fragile thread between past and present. Vincent felt the fear he had carried for hours melt into determination. "We'll help you find him," he whispered again, more confidently. "We'll make sure your love isn't lost to time." Grace's hand brushed the ghost's form gently, as if offering comfort. She could feel the silent gratitude, the echo of a lifetime of longing. "You can rest now," she said softly. "We'll carry your message to him." The two stood together, breathing slowly, the room no longer oppressive but full of quiet resolution. The letters, the locket, the preserved room, all of it told a story that demanded recognition. Adelaide's spirit had remained, tethered by heartbreak, and now they understood what she needed: the acknowledgement that love, even delayed by tragedy and prejudice, could still reach across generations. Vincent lowered his hand from the apparition and looked at Grace. "Helping her, helping him, it's bigger than us. But it feels right. It feels like life." Grace nodded, her eyes reflecting the flickering light through the shuttered windows. "And in helping them, maybe we're learning how to face our own pasts, too." The ghost lingered a moment longer, then slowly receded, leaving behind only a faint chill and the lingering scent of dried camellias. The room felt lighter, the anguish of a century eased by acknowledgement and compassion. Vincent and Grace stood together, hands still linked, gazing at the letters and locket. Each item was a bridge across time, a story of love that endured despite death and misfortune. They knew the next step awaited them outside this room, but for now, they allowed themselves a quiet reverence for the courage of two hearts long separated and finally understood. Grace and Vincent spent the afternoon at the New Orleans Public Library on Loyola Avenue, surrounded by towering shelves and the scent of old paper. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced above the stacks. They moved methodically, cross-referencing city records, historical directories, and newspapers from the 1860s. Grace carefully spread the letters and journal pages on a large table while Vincent scrolled through digital archives on his tablet. "Gabriel Laurent waited that night," Vincent said quietly, pointing to a record showing the young man's presence near City Park on March 15, 1863. "He stayed until dawn, heartbroken when Adelaide never appeared. He traced the dates with his finger. He returned here years later, an old man, and was buried near the Beaumont family vault." Grace's eyes filled with sadness. "He never married." Vincent shook his head. "He waited his whole life. Two people separated by prejudice and fate, both dying without closure. It's tragic." The weight of history settled between them. For hours, they worked together, sharing observations, piecing together Adelaide and Gabriel's story. As they labored, a quiet connection formed, built from shared purpose and the unspoken understanding of grief and hope. By mid-afternoon, their research complete, they left the library and walked to a small cafe a few blocks away. Sunlight warmed the street as they found a table outside. Over sandwiches and coffee, their conversation turned personal. Grace spoke of her grandmother Delphine's influence, of the quiet lessons about empathy and courage that had guided her own life. Vincent shared memories of his late wife, of the pain that had kept him shut off from joy for 5 years. "You make it feel possible to remember happiness," he said, a faint smile breaking through the grief he had carried for so long. Grace reached across the table, her hand brushing his, a simple gesture of reassurance. "Sometimes we need someone to remind us that the past doesn't have to define everything," she replied. They spoke of love, of loss, of the possibility of second chances. Each story shared drew them closer, their bond strengthened by the day's work and the trust they had cultivated. As the afternoon waned, they planned the cemetery visit for the night. Vincent explained that a descent he knew could grant them after-hours access to St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, ensuring they could reach Gabriel's resting place without interruption. Grace carefully gathered the letters, the locket, and the journal entries that would guide them. They reviewed their plan, discussing what they would say to Adelaide and Gabriel, mindful of the tenderness and respect the moment required. "It's more than just uncovering a story," Grace said quietly. "We're creating a bridge. It's an act of compassion across time." Vincent nodded. "Helping them, it's helping us too. We carry the sorrow, but also the hope." As sunset approached, the city streets glowed with warm light, the buildings casting long, soft shadows. They paused at the edge of the cemetery gates, taking a moment to breathe in the stillness. Everything they had prepared, the letters, the locket, the words of acknowledgement, was meant to honor two lives interrupted too soon. Grace looked at Vincent, sensing the gravity of what they were about to undertake. "Are you ready?" she asked. He smiled faintly, eyes reflecting both determination and a quiet excitement. "Yes. Let's make sure their love isn't forgotten." The mission ahead was delicate. It required patience, understanding, and courage. Yet both of them knew that this act of care had the power to heal across generations, not only for Adelaide and Gabriel, but for themselves as well. Every detail mattered: the words they spoke, the respect in their gestures, the preservation of a love that had endured despite barriers and time. They adjusted the letters and locket in a small satchel, and Grace held the journal close. Step by step, they walked toward the gates, aware of the approaching night and the responsibility they carried. The city of the dead awaited, silent and watchful, yet open to their presence. The air grew cooler as they passed through the streets, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Grace felt a quiet determination, a sense that the path ahead was as much about understanding the past as it was about embracing the courage to act in the present. Vincent's hand brushed hers once more, a reminder that they faced this together, not as strangers, but as partners in the act of remembrance. Sunset faded into twilight, and the threshold of St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 loomed ahead. The moment demanded focus and care, but also an openness to the stories waiting to be told. They were prepared, letters in hand, the locket ready, hearts aligned with the lives of two souls who had waited far too long to be acknowledged. The night ahead would test their courage and compassion, yet neither Grace nor Vincent hesitated. They stepped forward, knowing that every word spoken and every gesture of care would honor a love interrupted, bridging decades of sorrow with a single act of empathy and remembrance. Evening had descended over New Orleans, painting the sky in shades of deep violet and silver. Grace and Vincent moved quietly along the narrow streets, their footsteps muffled by the worn cobblestones. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of magnolias and damp earth. Ahead loomed the gates of St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, the oldest in the city, its stonework pale under the emerging moonlight. Passing through the entrance, they were surrounded by a city of the dead. Above-ground tombs rose like small buildings, whitewashed walls glowing in the moonlight. The cemetery felt suspended in time. Shadows stretched across marble, columns, and crypts. Silence pressed around them, heavy but not oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of the city beyond the gates. Vincent reached for Grace's hand, a gesture no longer tentative but natural and meaningful. The warmth of their joined hands grounded them as they navigated the narrow paths between tombs. He spoke softly, almost as if confessing to the night itself. "I've been afraid of everything for 5 years," he said. "After my wife died, I avoided life, avoided people. I took jobs examining old buildings because I couldn't bear to see other people's happiness." He paused, drawing a slow breath. "Being scared with you, being brave with you, it's the first time I've felt alive since I lost her." Grace stopped for a moment, squeezing his hand. She thought of her grandmother's words, the wisdom passed down through generations. "Sometimes you have to walk through darkness to see the light," she said gently. What we're doing tonight, it's given me purpose again. After my grandmother died, I've been moving through life without direction. helping Adelaide and Gabriel. It's shown me why I'm here." They continued through the winding paths, the tombs rising on either side like silent sentinels. Ahead, the Beaumont family tomb came into view, a grand structure with Greek columns, marble gleaming faintly under the moon. Its weight and scale reflected the family's history, the stories contained within its walls. A short distance away, Gabriel Laurent's tomb appeared, simple and weathered, almost overlooked among the grandeur. Its stone bore his name, and Grace felt the ache of the proximity, so close to the family tomb, yet separated by circumstance and time. Their love had been denied, and now, even in death, they were near yet apart. Grace knelt beside Gabriel's tomb, placing the silver locket on the steps. She opened it carefully, revealing the portraits of Adelaide and Gabriel, the engraving catching the moonlight, "Love transcends all." She arranged the letters along the steps, each envelope laid with care to create a path linking the two graves. Vincent moved to a small wild camellia bush nearby. Its blooms were rare in this part of the city, white petals glowing softly. He picked several blossoms and placed them gently on Adelaide's tomb, as if delivering a message from the living. Each flower represented a piece of her story finally acknowledged, a symbol of the love and care that had been absent for over a century. They stepped back, side by side, and called out softly into the night, voices steady. "Adelaide. Gabriel, your story is remembered. Your love is honored. We bring your hearts together." For a moment, the cemetery seemed still, the air holding its breath. A subtle shimmer passed through the space around them, faint but undeniable. The letters, locket, and blossoms created a connection, and the energy of two souls finally recognized began to stir. Vincent glanced at Grace, eyes reflecting the moonlight and the hope in their mission. "It feels alive here," he said softly. Like we're part of something bigger than ourselves." Grace nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle in her chest. "We are. This isn't just about ghosts or stories. It's about love enduring. It's about courage and kindness, even across time. And it's showing us what it means to truly care." Together, they stood quietly for a long minute, listening to the night around them, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant calls of night birds, the faint whisper of wind brushing against marble. The cemetery, once a place of sorrow and separation, now seemed to pulse with hope and remembrance. The moon rose higher, illuminating the path they had prepared. The letters, the locket, the camellias, they were more than objects. They were conduits for love that had waited far too long. Vincent's hand brushed against Grace's once more, and she squeezed it in acknowledgement. "I'm ready," he said, voice steady. "No matter what comes next, I want to do this with you." Grace smiled, her own heart steady, anchored by courage she hadn't realized she possessed until this journey. "We'll make sure they finally find each other," she whispered. The night air held a quiet expectation. Each detail, the placement of the letters, the locket, the camellias, was intentional. Every act was a promise that the love which had been denied for over 160 years would finally be acknowledged and honored. They moved to the final step of preparation, arranging themselves near the graves, ready to call the spirits and bear witness to the reunion that would bring closure to Adelaide and Gabriel's story. The moment balanced between history and eternity, between grief and hope. Every heartbeat, every gesture, carried the weight of centuries and the promise of resolution. And as they inhaled the cool night air, standing hand in hand amid the marble monuments and shadowed paths, the first whispers of something extraordinary began to stir in the cemetery. The gentle shift that comes when love, long held in waiting, is finally recognized and embraced. The moonlight spread across the cemetery, casting a soft glow over the whitewashed tombs. Grace and Vincent stood near the tombs of Adelaide and Gabriel, hearts racing as they waited, holding hands and breathing in the cool night air. Then, slowly, two figures began to emerge from the shadows. Adelaide appeared first, dressed in white, her presence serene and sorrowful, yet carrying a quiet light. Behind her, Gabriel stepped forward, wearing the attire of a young man from the 1860s, his posture both hesitant and determined. Time seemed to stretch as they recognized each other. The centuries of separation were written in the longing in their eyes, the weight of absence and loss pressing against every movement. Slowly, carefully, they moved toward one another, their steps hesitant at first, then quicker, driven by a force that neither death nor time could diminish. When their hands finally touched, it was real and solid. Not a ghostly passing, but the tangible warmth of two souls reunited. Their eyes met, and the transformation was visible. Sorrow lifted, and love radiated from their faces, illuminating the marble around them as if the night itself had softened in reverence. Gabriel lifted Adelaide's hand to his lips, a gesture that held centuries of devotion. In that small movement, time dissolved. The love that had been denied, confined by walls and prejudice, now flowed freely, visible to anyone who witnessed it. Grace felt a shiver of awe. Vincent exhaled slowly, overwhelmed by the pure, unbroken devotion before them. Adelaide turned her gaze toward Grace and Vincent. She smiled, the first smile they had seen, radiant and transformative. It carried gratitude that transcended words, a recognition of the living who had honored her story. Her eyes glimmered as if acknowledging the care, courage, and compassion that had made this reunion possible. The two spirits embraced, wrapping each other in arms long denied. Time seemed to bend, allowing the centuries of separation to compress into a single, luminous moment. Slowly, as the energy of love and reconciliation grew, they began to fade like morning mist, their forms becoming less distinct, yet the warmth of their presence lingered. For the first time in over 160 years, Adelaide and Gabriel were free, together, at peace. Grace's tears fell quietly, a release of joy and wonder, while Vincent's eyes glistened with emotion. In the shared silence that followed, they turned to each other instinctively. Without words, they embraced, two living souls who had faced the unknown and found hope, courage, and love in its purest form. Vincent whispered, his voice trembling with gratitude, "Thank you for reminding me that love doesn't end. That it's worth being brave for." Grace felt her chest tighten, a rush of emotion she had not anticipated. The bond they had formed in the haunted halls of the Beaumont house, through research, preparation, and shared vulnerability, had evolved into something undeniable. I'm falling in love with you," she admitted softly, words that were both terrifying and freeing. Hand in hand, they began walking back through the cemetery. The moon illuminated their path, silver light glinting off the marble and casting a gentle glow on their faces. Every step carried the weight of the night's revelations, the knowledge that they had witnessed something extraordinary. They had helped two souls find closure, and in doing so, discovered their own capacity for courage, compassion, and love. Their conversation was quiet at first. Grace spoke of her intention to remain in New Orleans, drawn not only by the city's history and vibrancy but by the work that had given her purpose. Vincent considered her words, then suggested they take the next step together, truly restoring the Beaumont house. Not merely for history, but as a living testament to love, resilience, and the possibility of new beginnings. "The house," he said thoughtfully, "freed from sorrow, ready to welcome life again. And maybe we can help each other do the same." Grace smiled, feeling a sense of alignment and hope she hadn't known in years. As they left the cemetery gates, the streets bathed in moonlight, their hands remained intertwined. When they reached Jackson Square, the energy of the city seemed to match the moment, a quiet, luminous calm settling over the square. They paused beneath a street lamp, shadows blending with silver light, and shared their first kiss. It was a kiss born from an ending, yet signaling a beginning, a promise that hope can rise even from the darkest moments. Walking together afterward, the significance of the night pressed gently on them. Two broken people had faced centuries of sorrow and separation, guiding and supporting each other as they honored lives interrupted by injustice and fate. In that shared act of compassion, Grace and Vincent discovered their own healing, realizing that courage, kindness, and vulnerability were not only ways to help others but to reclaim their own hearts. The night air carried the faint scent of magnolias and camellias, reminders of the ritual they had completed. The Beaumont house, Adelaide and Gabriel's story, and their own journey converged into a single thread of meaning. Grace felt the echo of her grandmother's wisdom, the knowledge that acts of care and courage could ripple through time, touching lives in ways unseen. Vincent spoke softly as they walked, voice tinged with wonder. Love like that, it's why we endure. Why we take risks. It's worth everything. Grace nodded, leaning into him, feeling both safety and exhilaration. And sometimes it finds us when we least expect it, reminding us that we are capable of more than fear. We can choose connection, compassion, and joy, even after loss. Together, they moved through the streets of New Orleans, transformed by what they had witnessed. Their story, intertwined with Adelaide and Gabriel's, became one of hope, courage, and enduring love. They carried the memory of the reunion, the sense of a bridge built across time, and the awareness that their own lives were forever changed. That night, beneath the New Orleans moon, Grace and Vincent realized that beginnings can spring from endings. That acts of kindness, bravery, and love, offered to others and ourselves, shape the future in ways both subtle and profound. Their hands remained linked, hearts open, stepping into a life infused with the lessons of compassion, courage, and the undeniable power of love. Weeks passed with Grace settling into life in New Orleans, her days filled with purpose alongside Vincent. Every morning, the Beaumont house awaited them, a structure heavy with history and emotion, now responding to the care and attention it had long been denied. Grace moved through its rooms as a volunteer, her hands dusting surfaces, removing debris, and breathing life back into spaces frozen in time. Vincent, the architect who had once avoided this house, now worked alongside her, courage guiding his hands as he inspected floors, reinforced beams, and brought warmth to cold, abandoned rooms. The house itself seemed to respond to their efforts. Cold spots vanished, the faint sounds of crying and lament faded, replaced by a quiet peace that filled each hall. They uncovered the home's original beauty layer by layer, stripping aged wallpaper, sanding floors, and polishing fixtures that had waited for decades to shine again. In every brushstroke and sweep of the broom, they could feel the weight of sorrow lifting, replaced by the promise of restoration and life. Vincent's patience extended beyond the building. He guided younger volunteers, explaining techniques, encouraging questions, and even buying lunch for those who forgot theirs. Grace worked in parallel, coordinating with the Historical Society, interviewing elderly neighbors, and uncovering stories that added depth to the home's past. Together, they moved in harmony, anticipating each other's needs, complementing each other's strengths, and building something more than a house. They were building a shared purpose. The local community began to notice. Neighbors brought lemonade to the volunteers, shared their own family histories, and offered anecdotes about the neighborhood's past. Vincent stayed late on some evenings, patiently explaining plans to residents who wanted to understand the renovation process. Grace organized potluck dinners where volunteers broke bread together, sharing stories and laughter that filled the house before the work was even complete. Through it all, Vincent transformed. The grief and isolation that had defined the years after his wife's death began to loosen. His laughter returned, quiet at first, then stronger. His conversations with Grace became more open, infused with hope and curiosity rather than lingering sorrow. Grace herself experienced a shift. The aimlessness that had shadowed her since her grandmother's death gave way to a newfound sense of purpose. She moved with confidence, connecting with the city and the people in it, her heart expanded by the work they were doing together. Evenings brought moments of reflection. They would sit on the restored front porch, watching the sun dip behind oak trees, their silhouettes etched against a sky painted in amber and gold. Conversations deepened as the days progressed. They spoke of dreams long held, fears once unspoken, hopes for futures they had yet to fully imagine. Each discussion strengthened the bond between them, creating a sense of inevitability. Love, once hesitant, now grew steadily, its presence undeniable. Small acts of kindness wove through their days. Grace made coffee just the way Vincent liked it in the mornings. Vincent prepared meals he knew would brighten her afternoon. Encouraging words, gentle touches, and moments of quiet support became part of their routine, reinforcing the intimacy they had nurtured through shared vulnerability. Vincent confronted a fear he had carried for years, the terror of opening his heart again. Loving Grace did not erase the memory of his late wife. Rather, it allowed him to understand that grief did not have to dominate life, that the capacity to care for someone new could coexist with past love. Grace, in turn, understood that her grandmother's final wish had brought her to the right place at the right time, guiding her into a life she hadn't known she needed. Their connection deepened as the house took shape. Rooms once silent and hollow now hummed with activity, warmth, and life. Every corner held a story they had discovered or revived. Together, they preserved Adelaide's memory while creating spaces for new memories to be made. The work was more than restoration. It was a healing process, for the house, for the neighborhood, and for themselves. In the evenings, after long days of labor, they would watch sunsets in quiet companionship, their hands brushing together on the railing, their shared laughter echoing against walls newly brightened by sunlight. Their conversations touched on futures and fears, revealing truths about themselves that had remained hidden for years. With each disclosure, trust deepened, and the inevitability of their love became more apparent, both resisting it and surrendering to its force. The Beaumont house, once a repository of sorrow, became a place of joy and connection. Volunteers came for the work but stayed for the companionship and stories that unfolded each day. Vincent found fulfillment in mentoring, seeing his knowledge and care impact both the building and the people around him. Grace discovered that purpose and love could coexist, her life enriched by her own courage and compassion. Every night, as the city settled around them and the house embraced a calm hush, Grace and Vincent would pause to reflect on the journey that had brought them here. They understood that healing, of spaces, spirits, and hearts, required patience, attention, and the willingness to be vulnerable. Every brushstroke, every meal shared, every story told had meaning far beyond what appeared at first glance. By the time the weeks had passed, the Beaumont house was no longer simply a structure in need of repair. It was alive, breathing through the laughter, care, and love of those who had devoted themselves to its restoration. Vincent had reclaimed his capacity to hope and feel joy. Grace had found direction and belonging in a city and a mission that resonated with her deepest values. And through it all, their connection had strengthened into a partnership rooted in shared courage, mutual respect, and the unspoken acknowledgement of the love growing between them. They moved through the house together, hands brushing as they passed, sharing smiles and small words of encouragement. Every completed room, every restored fixture, reflected the harmony they had cultivated, not just in the house, but in themselves. The work had become a metaphor. From brokenness could come beauty, from fear could come trust, and from sorrow could emerge love. Grace watched Vincent as he showed a new volunteer how to polish a balustrade, his attention patient, kind, and engaged. She felt her heart swell with admiration, recognizing that he had fully returned to life, no longer defined by loss but shaped by resilience. Vincent, noticing her watching, returned her gaze with a quiet smile, and the shared glance carried more than affection, it carried understanding, recognition, and a promise for the future. Their evenings often ended on the front porch, sitting side by side as the sun lowered behind the oaks, painting the sky in golds and purples. The rhythm of their days had settled into something comfortable yet profound, a balance of labor, laughter, reflection, and shared moments of intimacy. Every sunset was a reminder of what they had accomplished together, both in the house and within themselves. Small gestures became symbolic of their bond: coffee prepared just right, favorite meals remembered, a gentle hand resting on the small of a back, or a word of encouragement just when it was needed. Grace realized that the love her grandmother had wanted her to experience was unfolding naturally in front of her, built from patience, courage, and authentic connection. Vincent finally took the terrifying step of opening his heart fully, embracing the possibility of loving Grace without diminishing his past. He recognized that grief did not require living in shadows but could coexist with hope, joy, and new beginnings. Grace, in turn, understood that her journey had brought her precisely where she was meant to be, guided by purpose, compassion, and the love she had cultivated for both the living and those long gone. Together, they had transformed the Beaumont house and their own hearts. Each day, each interaction, each act of care contributed to a home full of warmth, purpose, and possibility. In restoring the house, they restored themselves, learning that love, courage, and kindness are intertwined and enduring. 6 months had passed, and the Beaumont house now stood restored, vibrant, and alive with visitors. Grace and Vincent, now engaged, led the opening tour together, their hands brushing lightly as they guided guests through halls that had once been silent and sorrowful. Every corner of the house shone with light, the work of months of careful restoration reflecting both the building's history and the hope now housed within it. Adelaide's room had been preserved as a memorial, a quiet testament to a love long denied but finally honored. Pressed camellias rested in a glass case, surrounded by Gabriel's letters, the silver locket gleaming softly in the display. Visitors lingered, reading the words of devotion and marveling at the beauty of a love that had endured beyond death. Beyond Adelaide and Gabriel, Grace and Vincent had uncovered other untold love stories of New Orleans, tales of people who had chosen compassion and courage over fear or prejudice. These narratives filled the house, reminding every visitor that love is not bound by rules or boundaries, and that kindness has the power to shape lives across generations. Grace addressed the gathered crowd, her voice calm and resonant. "Fear often feels like a barrier," she said. "But it is also a doorway. A doorway to connection, to love, and to the courage to be kind. This house has shown me that facing what frightens us can lead to something beautiful." Vincent added, his voice warm and steady, "The work we do, choosing kindness even when it is hard, is the true measure of a life well lived. My grandmother often reminded me that caring for others and extending compassion is the most important legacy we leave behind." Guests wandered through the museum, reading letters, observing artifacts, and hearing the stories of love that had defied obstacles. Adelaide and Gabriel's reunion remained the centerpiece, a living testament to the idea that love does not end, but transforms, endures, and continues to inspire. Visitors left moved, some wiping tears, others holding hands as if carrying the emotions from the house into the world beyond. After the last group had departed, Grace and Vincent slipped away to their private garden. White camellias surrounded a bench inscribed with the words "Love transcends all." Twilight painted the sky in soft purples and golds, a calm settling over the restored home. Grace sat on the bench, gazing at the blooms. "Do you think they're really at peace?" she asked, voice gentle. Vincent rested a hand on hers. "Peace doesn't come from forgetting or from silence," he said. "It comes from love, from courage, and from caring enough to honor someone else's pain. They are at peace because we witnessed them, because we helped their story be told." A single white camellia petal drifted down without any breeze, landing softly on the bench beside them. Neither spoke, both understanding the benevolent presence as confirmation. Grace leaned against Vincent, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here, from strangers meeting in fear at the gates of the Beaumont house to partners building a life rooted in love and courage. She realized that facing fear with open hearts, extending kindness even to those long gone, had transformed both the house and themselves. Vincent, feeling the warmth of her presence, understood that grief did not require stopping life. Honoring those who had passed meant living fully, embracing new love without diminishing what had come before. Grace had shown him that opening his heart again was not betrayal but renewal. Grace smiled, thinking of her grandmother's wisdom. The greatest kindness, she realized, was offering one's authentic, brave, vulnerable self. Acts of courage and compassion had bridged time, healed hearts, and demonstrated that love and horror, hope and loss, can coexist, always finding a way to emerge. Their future stretched before them, bright with possibility. The lessons of the Beaumont house, Adelaide and Gabriel's story, and their own journey were clear. Kindness costs nothing yet gives everything. Courage is not the absence of fear but acting despite it. Love, true and compassionate, is always worth the risk. The house, the museum, and the restored garden became more than places or spaces. They became living reminders of human potential, the ability to face sorrow, act with courage, and embrace love in all its forms. Adelaide and Gabriel's story was no longer a tale of tragedy but a triumph of love over death, hope over despair, and human kindness over societal barriers. Grace and Vincent, walking slowly through the garden hand in hand, felt the culmination of what they had accomplished together. The couple's first kiss had been a beginning born from an ending, a reflection of their shared courage and the connection that had grown through acts of care and vulnerability. The Beaumont house glowed softly behind them, the culmination of months of labor, love, and the honoring of lives that had been silenced for too long. They paused, looking at the white camellias and the twilight sky. Grace whispered, "Every story here matters. Every act of kindness matters." I think that's what Adelaide and Gabriel wanted all along, for someone to remember them, for love to be honored. Vincent nodded, taking a deep breath. And now we carry it forward. Their peace, our love, the courage to act, it all continues in the work we do and in the way we live. The couple sat quietly, letting the moment linger. The house behind them radiated warmth, and the garden held a serenity that reflected the healing and hope that had grown within its walls. They understood that life would continue to present challenges, that fear and uncertainty would appear again, but that with openness, courage, and compassion, they could face whatever came next together. The Beaumont house, the museum, and the garden stood as living proof that love endures, that courage matters, and that acts of kindness ripple across time. Grace and Vincent's story was only beginning, built on a foundation of compassion, bravery, and shared vulnerability. Their hearts full, they rose, ready to embrace the life that awaited beyond the gates of the house they had restored, not just physically, but in meaning, purpose, and love. As night deepened, they walked hand in hand through the garden, the house glowing behind them. The white camellia petals swirled softly at their feet, reminders of those whose stories had shaped this journey. In the quiet, Grace whispered a final thought: "Love always finds a way." Vincent squeezed her hand, smiling. "And so do we." The Beaumont house, once a home of sorrow, now held laughter, connection, and remembrance. Its restored halls and gardens were a testament to love's endurance, a place where stories of the past continued to teach the living about courage, hope, and the transformative power of kindness. Grace and Vincent paused at the gate one last time, turning to look at the glowing house, feeling the culmination of months of dedication and devotion. They stepped forward into the streets of New Orleans, hearts full, carrying with them the lessons, love, and hope that would guide their lives together. For viewers, this is a reminder: share where you're watching from, subscribe for tomorrow's story, and know that every act of support allows more stories of courage, love, and kindness to reach the world. Every comment and subscription contributes to spreading the message that love, bravery, and compassion always matter.